Welcome, Third Rock listeners, to the Branding Laboratory. I'm your host, Deevo, Chief Experience Officer for the brand Storyteller and the Fusion Creative Brands. And each week, I have the privilege of speaking with extraordinary leaders and entrepreneurs who are reshaping the way industries work. These conversations go way beyond the surface to explore the core philosophies, the lessons, and the challenges that define the brands that we admire today. And one of the greatest rewards of this podcast is the opportunity to share the insights of some of the brightest minds in business, people who are passionate about pushing boundaries and redefining what's possible. And as I always say, the stories we tell are the brands we build. And this show is a testament to the power of that concept. Let's dive in. So I am thrilled officially to introduce my guest today, Patrick Williams. He is an award-winning artist, TEDx speaker. He is a public speaker, keynote, does a lot of workshops around that area. And he's also the founder of the Satori Innovation Center. Or is it just Satori Innovation? Did I get that right?
Innovation. Yeah.
Satori Innovation. He's got 40 years of experience in this space, and he has inspired countless individuals and organizations to reconnect with their creative essence, which is probably going to be the centerpiece of our show today for you listeners who love to understand how entrepreneurs are utilizing creativity, because a lot of them don't. And I saw on your onboarding, you had the same premise, that it's surprising how many leaders I meet that don't think or have lost touch or just haven't really considered how they can instill or distill or whatever, implement creativity into their business and that whole left brain, right brain balance. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So by the way, I have my paradigm. You may be interested in this book, and I cannot find it for the life of me. But I started reading this book, and it's a neuroscientist, neurosurgeon, who is reframing the paradigm that we have a left and right brain that operate in silos. Have you read about this stuff?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, he talks about how they're symbiosis, and we've got, because of the environments that we operate in now, with social media and industrial and technology, that our brains have actually gotten away from the idea of intermingling and working together. So it's really fantastic. So anyway, Patrick, welcome to the Brand Laboratory.
I'm happy to be here, Deevo.
You have traveled the world. You have seen a lot of different things. You have run your own business. You have been in front of public audiences. You have experienced a bunch of different things in your life. And one of the reasons I started this show was to learn from people like you and to share your wisdom with my audience. And if we can affect one life, then I consider that a success. And I want to start off in this whole idea of creativity, because your approach to creativity is fascinating. And we talked just a few seconds ago, but especially in a world where a lot of people struggle to understand and tap into their own creative potential. And I see this all the time working with my clients. It's just they're not aligning at their core with who they really are. And they're trying to mimic or copy or do something that someone else has done instead of tapping into their own innate creative wisdom. So what are your core beliefs and values around this whole idea of creativity? Just tell me a little bit about that first to start with.
Sure. We're starting on a small question, right?
That's funny.
Yeah. So one of my main focuses is that, and to the benefit of what I'm doing, is that each of us were born with immense amounts of ability to be creative. And when we were children, we are natural creators. You walk into a room, you can walk into an empty room and put five-year-olds in there, and they will instantly start playing. They don't need any props. They will just begin to play because that's what they do. And part of this is that creativity is linked directly with learning. So the three pillars of learning are creativity, imagination, and play. And they're almost interchangeable. Sometimes you can't tell the difference where one starts and one ends, and they may not. I don't believe they do, actually. The starting point, I have a benefit because all of us have been there. All of us have been in the play space, in the imaginative space, and in the creative space. So this is natural. It's as natural to us as breathing, literally, and this absolutely. It's as natural to us knowing how to eat. It's even beyond our DNA, I think. It's just the nature of who we are as human beings. My starting point is somewhat simple because they everybody already knows how to play and how to be creative and how to be imaginative. It's just reconnecting them to that thread, right?
So what happens, and at what age does this happen, or is this a slow matriculation, or whatever
Yeah,
what's the antonym for matriculation? Because it's like a reverse engineering of
sure,
creativity over
right.
time, whether it's context or whether it's parents or whether it's trauma or learned behaviors or now the school system is one of my big things, beefs I jump on is
Mm,
like the school system teaching us to just literally zero critical thought anymore. And I have
right.
kids, and so I see it on a daily basis. So where did we go wrong? Where did this turn? Where did this pivot occur?
Yeah, you mentioned all very excellent examples of it. And I think of it as part education, part the world in general, and then the home life. So those three items have begun to dismantle our connection to our natural ability to be creative.
Hmm.
And it's easy to pick on because it is the main source. The school systems are notoriously non-creative now. They used to be a little bit more. When you were young, they were a little bit more. When I was young, they were a little bit more. And even I think of my mother, and she was able to recite a lot of poetry because
Hmm.
they were taught to learn that in school. And I learned a little bit. You may have learned a little bit of poetry to recite off your top of your head, but that's just a little example of how the creep of moving away from our natural abilities to be creative. Also, part of it inside the school systems, there's this huge emphasis on academics. I love academics. I'm an avid reader. You're an avid reader. I know from listening to your podcasts. But there is a balance that has to exist between the academics and for essentially play and creativity and imagination. If
I have
there's
some.
not,
I have something else, and I'm gonna unpack that in a
hmm,
second. But I wanted to throw something else into the equation that I've really been contemplating a lot lately. I'm a divorced man. I raised my children from 5 and roughly 2 years old by myself. And one of the things that I've really been considering of late, as my daughter just went off to college this year for the first
hmm,
time, and I look at her behavior and who she is, and I know that everybody's kids are different, even your own kids are different from each other. But I started seeing patterns in the younger one as compared to the older one, and I'm starting to wonder how much the idea of a traditional home where there were two parents raising the children and not me running off to work all day long and the kids were being raised by the school or being raised by a nanny or being raised by a daycare. And I'm wondering, and this is just conjecture, how much creativity was torn from them
hmm.
because of that environmental capacity. Any thoughts around that?
Sure. Looking at how they relate to their creativity obviously would be helpful to get that judgment. But it it clearly had an impact on how they're relating to their learning. And when you break it down, as I said before, the looking at their play, their imagination, and their creativity is directly affecting how they learn.
Hmm.
So disruptions in the environment, in their home environment, in the school environment, in any environment, a natural disaster will alter a child's relationship to their learning. And whenever that happens, it just shifts your direction, shifts,
Yeah.
and not necessarily that it can be, I mean, whom among us can judge if it's good or bad? I didn't want to go through the trauma that I experienced as a child, but boy, did it really teach me a lot of amazing lessons, right? So your youngest is showing different qualities of how he or she approaches their learning and their creativity, their play, etc.
Let me unpack that because I think I may have might have
Hmm.
misunderstood where I was going with it, and that might be my fault. So I wasn't necessarily saying that the trauma or the experience that they had coming from a divorced family was necessarily the predictor for why creativity has diminished. What I was suggesting is again, this is just conjecture.
Hmm.
And what are we at? 70% of couples now get divorced, I think is the
Right.
statistic. 70%.
phenomenal. Yeah.
So my
Yeah.
kids, just like 70% of the other people in this American population, and we know there is a decline in creativity. I'm just wondering, is there a correlation between the fact of a traditional home model where there's two parents raising the kids, two parents playing with the kids, two parents interacting with the kids, two parents reading books at bedtime with the kids, and all those things, and not an interjection of all these outside influences, teachers, nannies, daycares, who our children are spending a larger amount of time with and potentially less inherent creativity. I'm just wondering if there's a correlation. And we don't need to dive too deeply. I just wondered if you had some thoughts on it. That's all.
Definitely a correlation.
It just stands to reason, right? And I'm not
Yeah,
a
it does.
scientist, but it does.
Right. It does stand to reason that with those inputs, the child has way more opportunities to ask questions and to be curious and to have the environment in which to explore and
Mm-hmm.
discover. That's where the learning is most prevalent.
Yeah, so for my oldest daughter, from years 0 through 7, which is when her mother and I got divorced, I read to her every single night. I sang to
Mm.
her. We had this song book where we'd sing like traditional songs. Some songs we would write, some songs we would write together, like just silly playtime at bedtime, reading books, doing all these silly games before bedtime. We used to do this little animal lineup every morning. And that was 0 through 7. And I do know that 0 through 7 is like the most formative years for a child. That's just data. You can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Then my youngest, who's 3 years younger, she went 0 through 4 roughly. And I, when I look back and reflect, there's a different set of values that I was able to provide to her in that creative playtime as opposed to her older sister. And so that's where that came from. So I won't digress too far off that. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about you and your origin story. When you look back at your story and kind of your journey, can you take us through where you were, where you started? How did you get to this place now where you're a speaker, you're an artist, you're running a business on teaching people to be more creative? Can you again just like high level share your journey with us?
Sure, I'd be glad to. It's detailed in my TEDx talk,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll give a bit of it, but I certainly don't want to spoil there's part of the talk that is really impactful to what my origin is and how that shift happened. So I encourage people to review it, but I'll say that.
We'll put that in the show, but I'd
Oh
rather our
yeah,
listeners stay on our show if that's okay. Maybe
oh
share a
yeah,
little
yeah.
bit about it.
Oh,
Just
totally. Oh,
give
I'm
us a
happy to.
give us a teaser.
Yeah, I'm happy. I We had a very modest home world, 720 square feet of a house. I slept in the living room on a couch until I was 13. So that gives you a sense of what was going on. My father was an alcoholic, but he quit when I was in high school. Dating myself, for sure, that gives a little bit of different quality to the story, I guess. I graduated from high school in 1977. So there was the sort of a quality of the 60s, 50s in my home. Both my parents were much older than me, much older than all my siblings' parents. Of
I was
course,
gonna
my
say, I hope
older
so.
than me. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. So
Either that or you're just a prodigy.
I am. I am. So my father was 42, 43 when I was born, and my
Okay.
mother was 39 or so. So that puts a different spin on the whole situation. So they were somewhat older when the Depression was happening, and they were both active in World War II. So they had a whole different perspective to the world. And that affected my whole quality of growing up and being on a farm added to a lot of wisdom that a lot of my friends didn't have that were more in the city. So my dad and I, we always thought of how we could fix something on our own before we went to a neighbor to help, and let alone go and have somebody hired to fix it because we didn't really have the money. So those kinds of things added to the little spices of my cuisine, of my self-development. And I started to become interested in drawing. I was good in drawing in classrooms. I was the kid that all the other kids asked to draw something for a project, or the teacher asked me to draw something for the classroom. So that was instilled in me. I knew something was different, and I had the wherewithal to pursue that and to keep developing it. And it has been my lifelong passion in a way. And also, I in high school, I began to teach. I taught ice skating to younger kids in high school. And then I started martial arts in college. And that led me to a huge connection to teaching and to watching how children learn and how adults learn. So there, those two things, the synchronizing of art and my love of art and the synchronizing of martial arts, of karate, was my first martial art that I practiced, was monumental in my development, both on so many levels, on my self-assuredness, my confidence in myself through martial arts, the development of my mind through the arts, but also through the martial arts. We had a very amazing teacher, and he encouraged us to read as much as we can. We had a reading list for our belt progressions.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this was instilled in me to be curious and to be observant about everything around me, because there was a responsibility in the dojo to be teaching once you got to a certain level. When you got to a brown belt, you were starting to help teach. But certainly when I became a black belt, that was one of our responsibilities, to help teach. So that instilled in me to really be watching how people developed, how the adults developed, how the students developed, the younger people. And that then eventually led me, I'm skipping up through many years, to then having discussions with friends that were in the business world and entrepreneurs. And I started to notice that they had either a blinders or a complete inability to tune into their creative awareness, so to speak.
Let me stop you there. So
Yeah, sure.
these people, when you started to notice things, are these people that are in the same age classification as you roughly, or these are younger people?
Younger
People.
And so they were in their 40s. So they had been in the business world long enough to theoretically to know something, but they were still not quite comprehending what, one, creativity is, and two, how to nurture it inside of themselves. That's when I really started to put it together with all the experience of teaching myself how to draw, teaching myself how to paint, and then watching all these both art students and karate students, how they learned and how they struggled to learn. And blessings to my ability to put a lot of these things together, I started coming up with my theory of why things get blocked and then how to begin to restore that. And that's what I'm focusing on.
Before we go into your theories, do you think that there is, first I want to unpack something else before I ask this question. What I heard you say is a very diversified experience of a lot of different types of activities and experiences, and the whole conglomeration of nature and nurture going on with you, which may have aided directly in your creativity. Do you think that you inherently, though, possessed, and I'm not going to call it a gene or a DNA or whatever we can call it, but do you think that you inherently possessed a greater acclamation and a greater affinity for creative things, and that also aided to you, or are you making a connection, a correlation between your environment and exclusively?
Nope. The environment was certainly important, but I firmly believe that there are people on the planet that are excellent at certain things far beyond what other people are. Right now, I'm not playing much tennis, but I'm an avid tennis player. And I could have practiced 20 hours a day for 40 years, and I would never be as good as Roger Federer or Djokovic or Nadal or any of the other 1,000 professional tennis players. I love tennis. I'm good at tennis, but I'm not great, or I could never be great. I am excellent as an artist. I am a really good and technically and in my awareness of the psychology of art, all those things I am excellent at. So
are you suggesting that somebody that isn't necessarily artistic like you couldn't ever really become artistic like you? They could just they could reach a certain level, a certain crescendo, and that's their peak as it pertains to like being an artist. But there's something else in their toolbox where they could expand on because they have a greater gift in that.
Yeah, we can all attain incredible levels of when we put our mind to it and when we
Sure.
have a focus. I None of us who are painters or sculptors, Michelangelo is so far ahead of us that we can never even get close to him. That's
Mhm.
how brilliant he was.
Mhm.
And so me saying that I'm excellent, I'm very much in the space of saying, oh, Da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, they are beyond scope of what I can do. I'm good, but it's the acceptance that there are people who are so incredibly good that they deserve to be on that pedestal. But that doesn't cause me to doubt what people are able to achieve. And I always encourage them to push themselves in whatever direction. If Part of this is that when I work with people, I'm not trying to get people to be artistic. That's one of the things about working with creativity that people instantly think Patrick wants them to be an artist. If they want to be an artist, that's great. But I'm talking about them reconnecting with their creativity, which is different than being artistic. Art is underneath the giant umbrella of creativity, but so is business, so is invention, so is our life in general. We are incredible with our ability to be creative in our world. But just your description of how you invented songs with your children is just beautiful. And that is astronomically creative. It's just wonderful to hear. And I'm glad that you tell that story because it's beautiful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's actually a song that my oldest would have me sing to her literally every single night. There was one song in particular that we wrote together. So yeah, I appreciate that sentiment. What is creativity to you? Can you define that? Because you mentioned helping people understand creativity and reconnecting with it, but how do you define creativity?
Yeah, creativity is when we put our heart and our mind toward a goal that is somewhat intangible. It's a feeling. When I have an idea for a painting, the painting behind me, I'm working on. It's unfinished. The creativity that is inside that process is somewhat intangible. It's somewhat undescribable. When we're in it, we know it. So I work with people to place themselves in environments that are creative. Go to a jazz club. You know those musicians up on the stage are being creative, and you can vibe with that. When you go to a dance, you know that the choreographer was being creative. When you're at a museum, the paintings and the sculptures came from creativity, that feeling. And people have that inner awareness of when they're being creative. The aha moment, we have those. Some are really big, some are little small ahas, but those are the moments when we know, that was creative. That was a creative idea. I want to stay in a space that nurtures that. And I help people understand that I'm inside my studio, 500 some plus square feet, and this is where I have built a creative space. People can have something on their desk. If they can't have any other space, if they can't make a space, they can have some objects on their desk that remind them of their own creativity. And that assists people in getting into that intangible. That is part of what is so challenging with entrepreneurs, and not necessarily so much with entrepreneurs because they are much like artists, but business folks are terrified of the intangible.
Yeah.
And that's everything where I'm coming from is
Yeah.
making a relationship with the intangible.
And it's more than just the relationship, if I may say. I think that there is a stigma associated with creativity because they're associating it with something that might be less financially driven, less revenue driven. It's more of what's out there, it's
Right.
spiritual, like
Oh
in
yeah.
that space. But
Oh yeah.
what I hear you saying is that creativity itself can be cultivated, and it's more of a discipline and a philosophy simultaneous. Is that kind of what I hear you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So in terms of that, you help entrepreneurs, you said reconnect with their creativity. And I'm assuming this process has been developed over time. When you look back at what you were doing early in the days, where it may have just been an observation and a casual conversation with somebody, and now you've put it into a programmatized, structured process. Tell me what the defining element of teaching someone to reconnect with their creativity actually looks like.
Sure, sure. Part of it is
Mm.
listening to how they describe how they were creative when they were young. So that's an entire process for them to write about and for them to talk about. What did they do when they were 5 and 6 years old, let's say on summer vacation, that they couldn't wait to do the next morning? Those are the things that give me clues on how to tap into possibly areas that they can start to explore that will lead them into where their current creative energy is. Does that make sense?
Sorry, let me back up. Is it a structured program where you are inducing creativity connection, or are you hypnotically allowing them to tap back into something from days of yore? If you can
Right.
just describe that process.
So it's a little bit of both, because my belief is that they know more than anybody else. They know what and where and how they were creative when they were young. And that thread, it can't go anywhere. It's still within them. By me asking the questions and leading them in that process of self-reflection, they are going to revisit that realm, if it is a space in their psyche, because I think it's a definite area that we all have that we can visit, that some of us have been on. We haven't visited that part of ourselves since we were 7. But in the process of, as one of them is asking the questions and having them write about it, I'm very emphatic about keeping a journal, a life journal, but also when I'm in my process with people, they keep a creativity journal. So it's a journal specific about our process of how they are accessing, how they are restoring and reintegrating with their creative self.
So my interpretation of what I heard you just say is it's almost like having not ridden a bike in 20 years and just exercising that muscle memory to bring you back onto the bicycle and so creativity, it's there, it's deep down inside. We've just dampened it from our experiences, our context, like we were talking about in the beginning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The manuscript I'm working on goes into explanations of how I have seen this happen. And I call that creative colonization, the creative collapse, and the creative void. And this is what you were referring to and right off the bat, of how school systems or home life or the world out, the general world, how there's a type of colonization that happens to our creative self, that it is our first language that is stolen from us, just as a group would go in and colonize another group. They would take their rituals away, they would take their language away, and that's what I believe is happening to young children, because we all learn, literally, this is mind-blowing, all of us learned about the world through our play without a language. Think of that. We had no verbal language when we were 0 to almost 2 years old, but we were putting the world together through our play and our interaction and our relationships, which is marvelous. And then we learn language, which is mind-blowing. And eventually we learn to read and write, which is also incredible. So
that's funny that you say that. Sorry, I want to interrupt before I forget to say
no,
this.
that's right.
I just finished reading the Popol Vuh. Have you read this before?
The Mayan?
Yeah. And how when you reference when invaders come in and they basically rewrite the history for their new context. But most of the people that had, because the Popol Vuh, the cultures, the Mayan cultures that, and tell me if I'm wrong, this is my interpretation of it. The cultures of the Mayan that were there prior to the Spanish invasion, it was mostly done in a waxing, their language was like a waxing poetic. There wasn't a written history of it. While they spoke, they didn't necessarily write all this stuff down. And so most of the lore and the legends from pre-Spaniard invasion were passed down from generation to generation in a storytelling capacity, but they were never actually written down because of this inherent. And they talked specifically in the Popol Vuh how the culture was centered around creativity and playfulness, and like spirituality and all these different things. And so it's funny that you mentioned, I literally just finished reading that book, by the way. Just
Nice.
bizarre that you made that reference. So anyway, just a tidbit I wanted to throw in
That
there.
very cool.
Yeah, if you've read it, I'm assuming because
I'm familiar with the culture and the writing and the mathematics.
it's a mind-blowing book if you were looking for an interesting read and just
Sure.
like how that culture thrived on the whole idea of creativity and playfulness and
Hmm.
whatnot. So I was thinking as you were talking about this whole idea of application of heart and mind and
Mm.
how people often drift away from this creativity due to we've talked about societal expectations, self-doubt, the pressures of growing up and getting a job. And as we
Mm.
get older, we're often told to prioritize practicality and productivity over exploration or imagination or playfulness. And so for me, like I look at my own self, I consider myself a playful person, but even now, like I look at my life right now, I'm like, I was just talking to my partner the other day. I was like, man, all I do is work. That's really all I do right now. I
Right.
come to
Sure.
work, I go to work, I finish, I podcast, I work with, I'm not taking a lot of time to actually play. And so I've started to notice that like in my demeanor, it started to coming out. I'm more serious now. I'm more structured now. And it's crazy because if you look at Western culture, and I believe they're the biggest culprits of this, Western culture thrives on this idea of competitive nature, of being the best, the top athlete, the top quarterback, the highest GPA, the homecoming queen, and there's this whole idea of competing and just beating everybody. And everyone is ingrained from day one to just become the best, no pain, no gain. And there is no mantras around playfulness or creativity or
Mm.
collaboration or connectivity. It's all go out and beat your neighbor and become the best you can be. Do you think, and I'm going, this is a two-part question. A, do
Hmm.
you agree with that? That has been one of the pervasive reasons why creativity is being dumbed down. And that's question number one. And do you think that it's being dumbed down intentionally? Is there a pernicious reason? And we're going to go out on a conspiracy here, call
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Yeah.
But is there a pernicious reason at play to take people out of their creativity because it makes them better employees, it makes them better soldiers, it makes them
Mm.
better order takers, et cetera, et cetera?
Exactly. Yes to the first question, and yes to the second. And the fabric which quote unquote modern education was built on was a framework of a military approach. And that approach went seamlessly into a preparation for children to go into factories.
Mm.
So the bell and all, there's so many connections to factory life and how grade schools were set up. But it goes way back to the 1820s. There's a great book out there by John Taylor Gatto, Gato,
Mm-hmm.
and he goes through the whole history of education. I think it's been a long time since I read it, but he really discusses the negativity of this approach, the military approach, and for better term, the industrialized approach to get children ready for factories and for those kinds of jobs, which obviously now that is not the predominant occupation of children when they graduate from high school. We're in a service industry, we're in an information industry, but we're still using that outdated. I don't think it was ever healthy for education. Education is what adults do to children, and learning is what children do for themselves.
My face is frozen. You can still hear me, right?
I can still hear you. Yeah,
Okay, but my face is frozen.
you're back.
We may not be raising industrial soldiers or military soldiers, even though we still are. We're the largest military industrial complex in the world,
Mm,
but we are still raising soldiers, metaphorically, to work for a
yes.
corporation, to sit in a row, to sit in a cubicle, to take orders, to follow whatever construct, work for someone else. And the whole idea of small businesses and entrepreneurs and all those different things, while I do think it's making a resurgence,
Mm,
it's a fair statement to say that it was under attack for the last few years specifically. But the whole idea of people becoming critical thinkers, this is my personal hypothesis, by the way, is that's not good for a society because that's a culture of people who ask questions. By your own admission, that's a culture of people who are curious. That's a culture of people who are collaborators. That's a culture of people who are willing to push the bubble and maybe say no to the establishment. And so those people are not favored because they're not going to get in line and just follow orders, and because they're creative, it's going to enable them to do those sorts of things. I'm assuming you agree with me just by the very nature of what you've said. You're nodding your head.
Absolutely. And it's by whom are those people not wanted? That's the question. But what you were deciding, what you were describing is exactly what a society should be. A healthy society has citizens who are able to critically think, who are able to analyze, who are able to choose between not just two ideas, but a dozen ideas. Who a healthy society has people who are able to say no, say, I think this may be a better way to do it. Let's think about that. Let's discuss that. Let's see if that makes sense. Those are things which make a healthy society. When you're wanting to have an industry and you're wanting to have a corporation, those aren't necessarily things that you would like all of your citizens or all of your employees to have.
For sure.
But we know as entrepreneurs that that's the way to go. It's the healthier way. It's the more powerful way.
In the context of entrepreneurship, and I'm an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur, most of the listeners on the show are entrepreneurs. And by the way, thank you for joining. For those of you who are on the podcast now, we're talking to Patrick Williams. He is a creative entrepreneur who is teaching other entrepreneurs and other business leaders how to tap back into their creativity. So a good conversation so far. In the context of entrepreneurship, how, and you defined creativity earlier, but how do you define creativity in the context of entrepreneurship and leadership? And I've heard you say everyone has access to it, but in your experience, what are some of the most common blocks to creativity in leaders based upon where they are and what they're doing right now?
The intangible quality is one of them. And it is something that entrepreneurs they're artists. And this is what baffles me. They live like I lived in my 20s and 30s. No sleep, eating on the run. All you do is focus on work, and you're going for new ideas and thinking of the next big painting, the next big widget, the next big whatever it might be. So I feel like I'm going to go back to a point that I wanted to make that you touched on, is that taking time during the day to, one, play, or two, do nothing. In that 15 minutes, let's say it's just 15 minutes of doing nothing, it's going to open up a space in which more ideas are going to be able to come into your awareness, your psyche, than if you were triple tasking or quadruple tasking on something, which is actually going to push you further behind. So taking the time to do nothing, or taking the time to do something, go for a walk. This is part of what I encourage people to do is back in the day, before 1900, nearly every writer, for sure, but painters, musicians, every artist would take walks during the day just to clear the mind, be in nature, move your body, take a walk for a little bit, and then sit down. If it is only 15 minutes, do it. It's going to shift.
And do it barefoot.
And do it barefoot. Yes.
That's so funny.
Grounding is important.
Yeah, grounding is insane, and people think I'm crazy because I literally walk barefoot everywhere I go. I do a walk. I try to do a walk every day around at 12 o'clock. By the way, I have a daily alarm that goes off so that I'm not sitting here working, or that I actually take time. And I was on the golf course today, walking through the golf course, and people are like, they just look at my feet. Let's do barefoot. It's so funny to me.
I love it.
My show, the whole show that the premise of how I wanted to take the call of this podcast with you today came from the walk today, because I was trying to figure out with a creative angle, no pun intended, where you and I could have a good conversation around this. And so during this walk, it came to me that I was really just going to explore creativity itself with you, and how people are being blocked by it and how they can be benefit from it, and all those sorts of things. So that being said, what I just heard you say is some of the most common blocks to creativity is that people are not taking time to get outside. People are not taking time to go for walks. People are not taking time to journal. People are not taking time to be alone. One of the things I do every year is I take a solo retreat where I just go off into a cabin in the woods somewhere. I have no phone. I have no technology. I literally have there's like very rudimentary elements in the home on purpose. And I bring books, I bring my journal, I write, and I do nothing other than just be by myself. And I think about that all the time, because the impact that I get from that, and I look at other people, and This culture we live in today, and I see this in my children, man, we are really scared to be by ourselves and not
Mhm.
have this constant, pervasive influence of information bombarding us all day long.
Exactly. And I love to hear that you take that time once a year, that you take the time once a day. It is so important for people to block that in and deal with, in a way, how scary it is.
Mm,
We need to, if something is scary, that is the first sign that it is absolutely necessary to put
mm,
some energy into it and to explore it, because you're going to learn so much from that. If it's
yeah.
easy, it's why we're all capable of doing the things that are easy for us with no problem. Just a year and a half ago, I started making portraits. I'd made a couple over 50 years, but my wife had encouraged me for 20 some years to paint portraits. And after 50 years of painting, it is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it has been so rewarding. It was like Alex Honnold on El Capitan,
Mm.
but
I,
somebody
I,
had
I'm
polished it.
I'm absolutely fascinated by individuals like yourself who can just paint something from nothing. And I say this with all due respect because I'm a photographer and I create art in a sense, but I'm using a camera and technology and it's taking all those interpolations and extrapolations and is creating something, and that is a form of art. But my partner and I went to a painting class a couple of weeks ago where we went and we just watched the artist, and she'll paint something and then you try to replicate it and she walks you through on how to replicate it. And she's just up there like zippity doo dah from nothing and pulling this stuff just completely out of her headspace and putting it on paper. And then I literally looked to Melissa and I was like, man, I haven't, when I'm taking photographs, like just mad respect. When I'm taking photographs, I have art, I have something already right there, a
Sure,
juxtaposition
sure.
that I'm just basically recording with the camera. And then my camera's interpolating that and adding some light and some different structure to it. But this person is literally creating something from absolutely
Mm.
nothing, which is just mind boggling to me. And this leads to my next question because creativity is often associated with art. And it is, right? And we've touched on that. So in your words, and how can an entrepreneur or a leader or a CEO or just anybody who hasn't really tapped into their creative thinking, as how can they do that as a how can they tap into their creativity to use it as a strategic tool in what they're doing for their profession?
That's a great question. I have three levels of creativity. There's general creativity that we do when we pick what clothes we're going to wear. I picked this red shirt today for the podcast. There's centralized creativity, and that is most often when it's connected to businesses and to people who are working on specific problems in their world, that they're using a centralized creativity. And then there's specialized creativity. Specialized creativity is usually connected to the arts, but when you're in the entrepreneurial world, all of us are using qualities of the specialized creativity. That's a little bit more intangible, but we have to push ourselves into these spaces that are uncomfortable. And we can't just, as I said before, we can't let ourselves just relax in the ways of places that we're good at. Like I
Mm,
said, we need to look for that. If we don't want to spend any time together without any of our devices, we need to be there. And
mm,
that is a place that is going to give you some ideas on the widget that you're working on. If you're
mm.
trying to come up with the invention. And part of it, what's important also is that if you try to grab a hold of it, it's going to go away.
So the
So,
things that we struggle with most are often where we need our greatest creativity, is what I'm hearing you saying. Our greatest attention to that situation, whatever it may be. So if we struggle with meditation, then that's our body's way of saying, okay, there's something here that's lacking. We should spend some time with it. Or if we're struggling with being in nature, our body is telling us there's something. So is that what I hear you saying? It's like our struggles and our impediments are just a reflection of what we actually need.
you're right. And to pay attention.
Mm,
It's one thing to sit on the cushion and get up after half an hour and say, there it was again. That was hard as shit. But it's another thing to notice how hard it was
mm,
and to ask to have information given to you
mm,
about that. Does
Totally makes
So
perfect sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So rather than just acknowledging that, oh, that was hard, which we all have stuff that's hard, but start to look at and feel what was hard about it. Just saying that it was hard isn't enough for us.
Hmm.
If you're really trying to invent that widget that is like no other widget that's ever been invented, you have to get up on that cliff and get past that point where you don't have a rope and you have to figure this out. You
Mm.
have to look at it. You have to look at that fear and really find out what it's made out of. It's
Mm.
one thing to be scared. When I'm out in the wilderness, if I'm up in Alaska, I'm scared of grizzly bears because
Mm.
they can eat me. But I'm not in fear of them because if I'm in fear of something, it will shut you down. People are shut down because in some ways they fear creativity.
When do you go to Alaska, by the way? It's
Oh,
something you do.
no, I haven't
Oh, I
been.
was like, man, I want
I've
to go
been
to Alaska with you.
I've been in wilderness and in with bears,
Oh, that's amazing.
but going into Alaska would be a whole different world. I'd have to. There's a lot to know.
Yeah. You're in Colorado, is that correct?
No, I'm in Nebraska now. I
For
was
some,
in Colorado.
yeah, I thought I saw a Colorado phone number on your form.
Yeah, yeah, I still have it.
A small story about bears, and I'll get back to my questions. I was driving down the freeway. This was last year. Here, I'm in here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm coming up the freeway. It's like the external business loop that runs around the city. And I was coming from soccer because I play soccer for a men's team. And I'm driving up, and it's about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And suddenly, there's two or three cars in front of me, maybe a couple 100 feet in front of me, and they start coming to a slow stall. And so I slow down. There's not a lot of cars on the road at this time. Anyway, a black bear comes rolling across the free. We never get bears here. Like it's like the last of the bears. But
Right.
I've never actually seen a bear outside of a zoo. And so it was like it was a really cool experience for me, is all I'm trying to say.
That's
Anyhow,
super cool.
back to failure, because I'm fascinated with
Mm.
how, yeah, I'm really fascinated how leaders deal with strife. And you're talking about how when we're struggling, or when we have strife, when we have failures or setbacks, that's an opportunity for us to dig deep. And creativity is one of the ways that can help us overcome these setbacks.
Absolutely.
So, how do you approach failure I hate the word failure. I always see them as like an opportunity to learn something, but
Sure.
let's just call it for semantics purposes, let's just call it failure. So, how do you approach failure in creativity? Do you think there's a way for leaders like myself or CEOs to reframe failure as part of a creative process in what they do?
Yes, definitely. And I feel this is one of the places that the arts has a lot to give to the business world and to entrepreneurs, especially about failure. Because when I was learning to draw, you're not going to be able to draw the vase with the flowers for a while.
Mm.
And every time you try to draw it is technically a failure. And that is one of the lessons of the arts. When you're learning to play the violin, you don't play Bach the first time your bow hits the strings. You play something that is nothing related to Bach.
Mm.
As an example for myself, when I started a year and a half ago to paint portraits, I started on a self-portrait, and I thought, after a couple days, I thought, I'm not going to ever show anybody this, and I'm not going to do portraits because
Mm.
this is bad. I can't show anybody this. Then I saw a photograph my niece had up on Facebook, and I instantly contacted her, and it was of 6 young girls in their teens of a dance troupe. Her daughter is in this dance troupe, and they were behind this, they were backstage, they were peeking through the curtains to the younger kids, the younger girls in their dance troupe. And I asked her, the only thing I said, was that staged? And she said, no, that was one of the parents took that. I said, oh, I'm going to make that painting. And then I was able to capture, not very well, in my opinion, but I was able to capture these young women looking through the curtain. And that gave me enough to be confident to show people. And I think it's on my website, I'm not sure. But then I really started to apply myself. So I had to be willing, after 50 years of doing something, I made thousands, 3,000, 4,000 paintings in my life.
Hmm.
tens of thousands of drawings. But, and there are many more that I've destroyed. I burned 300 paintings one year, and I've recycled truckloads of drawings that aren't necessarily, in some ways, they're failures because they didn't pass my standard.
Mm.
So when an entrepreneur is working on ideas, I believe they have to be willing to toss them out, just as I would toss out the bad drawing of the vase and the flowers.
Mm.
Just crumple it up and toss it. Have another idea, have another try, sketch something out, crumple it up and toss it out. That is one of the, when you're writing, I'm a writer, I'm writing a manuscript, but I don't yet really call myself a writer. I'm a writer, I'll just say it. I edit, how can I write a paragraph without getting rid of 3 other paragraphs?
Mm.
So we're always discarding. And if we think of them as failures, we could say that they are, but there's something different in how we've attached our sense of failure and what a failure actually is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So
I hear you, resilience and adaptability in a lot of what I'm hearing you saying, and through creativity, through a daily practice of creativity, perhaps you can learn to manage and have greater resilience and foster greater adaptability. And whether as an entrepreneur or leader or an artist like yourself, my entire last 2 years has been a rewrite, tossing it out and rewriting. I've been rebranding and rebuilding my business model over the last couple of years, and really trying to step it into my true strengths and powers and passions. And creativity has been a big part of that for me. And as you just said, like, I've rewritten my own rule book at least 4 times now, trying to figure out how can I add the most value. And you don't know this about me, but one of the things I actually do on the side, and I'm not an artist, but I do paint. I'd like to do acrylics, and I'll go over to the Michael's art store and just pick up some blank canvases, and I'll just start painting. But for me, it's like walking in nature barefoot. It's like detaching from everything you have going on
perfect.
and allowing your mind to just wander where it will without any predispositions or ordained ordained cultural impositions to get in the way, and just allow you to be creative again. I've seen in my business, and I work with business leaders as well, that a lot of the leaders that I work with struggle with this whole idea of vulnerability. And yet creativity often requires vulnerability.
Absolutely.
What advice would you give to leaders who find it hard to open up to new risky ideas because they're afraid of being vulnerable, they're afraid of tapping into their creativity? What advice would you give these people?
That's a great question. And it's an intense question. I've seen it so often in both in the arts and in martial arts, when often in gender wise, women have a tremendous fear if they're in the dojo and as sensei, I'm telling them to get punched by this guy. The key is not to be where the punch ends,
Sure.
to step away. But that's a quality. I do some of this when I'm with people, I'm with a group. There's a wooden tool, a weapon called the boken. It's just a wooden practice sword. And I have people line up and I swing it at their head slowly at first. And I tell people that you can stay there and get hit by the wooden stick, or you can move away. And in that process, they are confronting their vulnerability. They're being vulnerable to stand there and me swing the stick at them, but they're overcoming it by their ability to move out of the way. And the boken is only about this wide, so in theory, that's all that they have to move, is out of that width. So it gives them a new perspective on what they feel when they're in that vulnerable space. Then they can translate it. I feel strongly about being able to translate one experience and move it into another.
Mm.
When we're experiencing our vulnerableness outside of that exercise, there's all these emotions that come with it. When we're in the exercise, essentially when you're inside the dojo, it gives you in a way, a safe area to experience that vulnerability, and to maybe it's not necessarily overcoming it, but you're starting to get used to what the feeling is, and then you're becoming aware of how to change that, how to step away, how, if necessary, to guide it out of the way, to guide. We also do an exercise called push hands that is similar, that two people have their hands back to back and one pushes and one yields, and not to separate. The idea is always to stay together, but to be able to read how somebody is being giving energy and how somebody is receiving energy, how someone not necessarily aggressive or passive, but that's one way to talk about it. There's an aggression that goes toward the person, and there's a passivity that can go with it, but then can guide it out of the way. So that's another place and space that people can experience being vulnerable, but it's safe. Nobody's going to get hurt.
All right. So metaphorically speaking, not all of us have access to a bokken or a dojo or a judo or a taekwondo center. So if I'm a CEO and I'm struggling with the idea of vulnerability, and you're telling me that creativity often requires vulnerability, how can I open up to these new, riskier, innovative ideas using creativity and vulnerability without having access to being sideswiping a bokken sword?
Yeah. Take a singing class. If there's anything that will get you to feel vulnerable, it's being asked to sing in front of 10 people in a class. That's just one example.
I have a friend,
or painting.
I have a friend who does, God, what's it called? Ecstatic dancing.
Sure.
Where she does ecstatic dancing seminars where she teaches people how to become more creative in the sense of just like letting it go, and just whether it's in your living room or with a group of people, just like moving and dancing. And so I actually tried this with her on a Zoom one time. She came and did a presentation in our mastermind for it on our Zoom, and I just remember thinking, God, this is corny and silly. But in the 15 to 20 minutes where we were required to just like move and screech and holler and just make all sorts of obnoxious sounds, I found like this freedom that sort of started opening up in my channels. And just for the rest of the day, I just had this smile on my face of thinking back, A, how stupid I must have looked. But B, like it was just like this cathartic experience where I didn't give a shit about anything else. And just at first I was like looking around, who's watching me? And I was looking in the Zoom window, who was watching, who's paying attention to how stupid Deevo looks. Like, and no one's paying attention to how stupid I look. Everyone's
because
worried about
they were moving around.
Yeah. So it's pretty funny. So what I hear you saying is putting yourself into uncomfortable situations and almost facing your fears, or putting yourself in situations where you're forced to be vulnerable and utilize, and in the process of being vulnerable, the creativity begins to flow. That's what I hear you saying.
100%. Absolutely. Courage is what happens after you've gone through something. You don't start out saying, I'm courageous. I'm going to go help those people out of that building that's on fire. No, you just run in, grab the people and run out. And then afterwards, someone might say about you, wow, that was courageous. The same is at a different scale, of course. The same is true. Some people have just as much fear. They have just as much fear to move their body like that as someone does to run into a burning building.
Sure.
So I'm very aware of how early traumas around creativity can affect how people are today. And that's part of why it's so hard for, let's say, a CEO to loosen up, because they were shut down at one point around their creativity. And now that's not that important. We can get along.
I'm going to open up and tell you something very vulnerable about me that I recently uncovered about myself. And it was during a coaching session with one of my mentors and coaches. And it turns out, as a child, I was actually told that, because I love to paint, and that I was actually told that being a painter was only what feminine girls did. And this is from my father. My father was highly abusive. It sounds like you and I we should get a beer together and tell some stories.
That would be fun.
And I had often wondered why I'd gotten away from painting and why I had gotten away from some of the things that I loved doing. And it was because it was in my family, my father, who was very masculine and very fraternal based, like homogeneously, what's the word? The words escape me, but women and men, the men are greater than women. There's a term for that. Misogynistic. My father was very misogynistic. So I think we said at the same time. And so it was frowned upon for me to do anything that was creative, because that was like what girls did. And
Absolutely.
I was like, what are you talking about? Some of the greatest artists on the planet are also men. What are you talking about, man? You've obviously never been to a museum in your 40 years on this planet, because most of the beautiful things in there. Anyhow, I digress.
Yeah, no, it's real. And
there,
that's what I call creative collapse.
uh,
That it just shut you down. No
mm,
more painting. That's the collapse. And
I've gotten back to
then
it.
good. I love that. That's great.
So there's a pragmatic element to business, obviously. This, whether it's the financials, whether it's running your reports, whether it's looking at your data, whether it's just there's a pragmatic piece of running a successful business, right? And so how can you or how can we, and I guess this is what advice would you give? How
Mm,
do leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, business people in general, how do they balance this need for creative innovation, if you will,
mm.
with the demands of running a pragmatic, stable, profitable business without sacrificing both? So, how do you integrate and manage your business by using creativity, but also being pragmatic and sensible about it so that you're not just like running off the deep end, if you will, with your creative outlets?
Sure. It's all a matter of timing. We, with someone who has always been 100% focused on the pragmatic business numbers, everything in a line, everything in a row, everything sequenced. Introducing, again, it doesn't take it's about scale. I'm not asking people to spend 3 days a week on their creativity and just push the business side to 2 days a week. Or it's carving out a little bit of time on two levels. A little bit of time when you're doing something creative yourself. And it could be just a walk, but it could be making a drawing. It could be picking up the violin and starting to learn the violin. It could be ecstatic dance. But then also have a bit of time, and this can be after work, it can be on the weekend, to go and experience someone who is expressing their creativity.
Love
I
that.
believe that when we're in those environments, when we're in the jazz club, and this is an exercise that I give people. Take your either individually or with a team. Let's say you have 8 people in your team. You go to a jazz club with your creativity journal and you sit there, you have your conversation, you have your libation, you listen to the music, but you also are aware that those 5 people, those 3 people, whomever are up there on the stage, they're being creative. That vibe literally is going through your body. The vibration is, you're encircled by it. It's moving in through you and through you. Keep your widget, if your team is working on developing a widget, keep that in mind as you're listening and jot things down in your journal. Maybe something doesn't come up, but out of 8 people, you're going to have some ideas that come up with respect to your widget because you're in that environment. Being with creative people naturally assists you in being creative. Being in a museum, being at a dance, looking at architecture. This is one of my exercises to find 4 buildings in your town, in your city that are known to be beautifully architected, and go there with your journal, with your team, or just by yourself, and look at the building. Spend time outside walk around the building, notice everything you can about the building. Go inside the building, go to every floor of the building. Notice how things are put together. Someone thought about that in their creative space, in their creative psyche, to put the building together exactly that way. That is, buildings are remarkable gifts of seeing literally the manifestation of the creative process. So, as an example.
On that note, what I hear you saying, and this will probably be our last question, but I hear you saying creativity is like a contagion. And if you surround yourself with creative people, creative outlets, creative opportunities, it becomes like a space for you, like a natural ecosystem for you to develop your own.
Exactly.
Looking ahead, and this will be my last question because we're running out of time. And thank you again. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights with us. Looking ahead, and there's a lot of different changes on the horizon going forth, both politically, geopolitically, financially, business wise. I think we're just at the tip of the tip that I think we're just at the beginning of this tipping point. How do you see the role of creativity evolving in leadership and in the business world?
I feel like there's been so much talk about it, in the past maybe 10 years, but I I think that's the in-breath of the start of the conversation. Before I'm going to say anything, I have to fill my lungs up so I can actualize my vocal cords to make the sound that you're hearing. The conversation on creativity inside the business world has been the inhalation the last 10 years of people realizing this is important. And now the conversation is starting. You and I having this conversation is important to more people comprehending how essential creativity is. Because all the way back to where we started, creativity is intimately related to learning. And the entrepreneurial framework must have its foundation on learning, which is connected to play, imagination, and creativity. So to learn how to make your business better, we have to rely on creativity. And that's just one section inside the business world and inside the entrepreneurial world that creativity can be applied to. Creativity also, obviously, and we haven't even touched on this, innovation. Where does innovation start? Innovation starts with a creative idea.
For sure.
And if you don't have any creative muscles, if you haven't been inside the creative gym, if you're not putting more weight on that creative barbell, you're not going to come up with anything innovative because you're creatively a weakling.
Yeah, we did touch on it earlier. Remember, I was talking about the bicycle and getting muscle, tapping back into that muscle memory. That's funny that you mentioned that in terms of my question to you. I did a project a few months back with Bank of America and their CEO, Brian Moynihan, and he was doing a keynote to some of his senior leaders and was here in Charlotte. And one of the central pieces of his keynote to his leaders was how they could tap back into creativity for their teams and really bringing back ways to inspire their staffs, inspire their employees, and in the process of doing so, inspire their clients to become raving fans, all this sort of stuff. And I know a lot of it was like corporate raw, but he's obviously CEO of the largest bank in the world for a reason. And in watching him navigate the room later that night in the reception area, he was very genuine. He was very affectionate with his team. And you could see that he wasn't just like blustering his words. He was living that space. And whether it was intentional or not, it was a powerful message. And one of the things that he said in his presentation was, and I believe it was a quote from Albert Einstein, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but creativity is seeing what everyone else has seen and thinking what no one else has thought. And I really, when he said that, I'd heard the quote before, and I don't believe that he gave Albert Einstein credit for it. But nonetheless, I just remember thinking that's a really powerful quote, and it's like a good way to end this. God, I keep on freezing up on my camera. I'm in a horrible froze face here. But it's an interesting construct to think about. Creativity is seeing what everyone else has seen and thinking what no one else has thought, and it lends itself to what you just said on the innovation side of things.
Totally, for sure. Yep.
Wow. Patrick, this has been a really fun conversation. I'm going to switch cameras so that I am not looking like a total tard knuckle right now. Hold on one second. And
you're doing an ecstatic dance.
Yeah, I was in this state of now the camera light is awful. So
that's okay.
Yeah,
I love all your books.
That's why we have two cameras here, so that if anything happens, thank you. And I am proud to say that I have read at least 90% of these over many years. I am a perpetual learner. I am a perpetual curiosity seeker. And so this is how I stay relevant and be able to have cool conversations with people like yourself. So
you're awesome.
Patrick, this has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate you coming on the Branding Laboratory podcast and sharing your insights and your journey with us. Your dedication to helping other people reconnect with their creativity is really inspiring. And if anybody wants to learn how they can connect with their own creativity and utilize innovation and things of that nature, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
My website is Patrick Williams Stay Creative, and my email is patrick@patrickwilliams.com.
And we'll put those in the show notes as well.
Perfect. And it would be awesome. I have a couple Instagram, actually 3, but one of them is about a daily drawing that I do, a morning meditation drawing, which ties into one of the exercises that I do with people.
And that's great. And what's your Instagram?
PMW Creativity.
PMW Creativity.
and you might be interested in PMW_camera. I post a photograph every day.
Oh, that's cool. I will check that out.
And then I have a new one, PMW_painting, that I'm putting photographs of this painting as I move along in its progression.
That's great. I love that those are your backdrop, by the way. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Patrick, as we close,
that's vulnerability.
That's right.
Showing people that I'm still working on this.
That's great. Hey, as we close, I'd love to know if I can connect with anybody to help you spread your message of creativity, or if you're looking to connect with anybody in particular, can I help you with that? Just let me know if there's someone that you're looking to connect with.
Sure. You just mentioned I'm fascinated by the CEO's keynote and his obvious connection to creativity. So I'd love to chat with him. That would be exciting.
I don't know if I can connect you with the world's most powerful banker, but I will certainly see what I can do. He was a really invigorating speaker. I can connect you with the gentleman who actually was thinking about it, because you said you're in Nebraska, Dr. Ben Tapper. Have you heard of him?
That's not familiar.
He is a functional physician and chiropractor, and he's out in Nebraska. Just a good friend of mine and just a wonderful human. Maybe I can connect the two of you, because I believe that that just connecting good people together, there's always something good that comes of it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, but look him up. He's on Dr. Ben Tapper is his name. I've had him on the show a couple of times. I've known him for a few years, and I'm pretty sure he's out near Lincoln, Nebraska, if I recall.
Okay. Yeah, it's not far from, I'm in Omaha.
Okay, cool. Man, we've covered a lot of different things today. We talked about the importance of creative alignment. We talked about resilience. We talked about purpose-driven. We've talked about constructs of the classroom and the lack of critical thinking. And it's just been a really cool conversation. For more inspiring conversations like this, please don't forget to subscribe to the show on YouTube, leave us a review, follow us on social media, and all the things that you do on the electronic world. And if you're ready to discover what it means to build a brand deeply aligned with who you are and utilize creativity and innovation, you can head over to my website, thebrandstoryteller.com, and drop me a message and we can connect. I'm Deevo. This was Patrick. I really appreciate you joining the Branding Laboratory. Have a wonderful evening. What a conversation that was. Thank you, Patrick, for the insightful and delightful conversation around creativity. And we covered a lot of different things. Patrick talked about how creativity is innate, but we often suppress it as children and through the context of our life, but it's still never too late to tap back into it. And reconnecting with our creative outlets and our innovative outlets is crucial for leaders. And I can speak from experience, having done a good job, maybe not a great job, but a good job of really trying to stay grounded and rooted in my creativity. And I use it on a regular basis in my business. And for anybody who doesn't think that there's an outlet or a need or a pathway for creativity, check in with Patrick. He's got some great ways and some workshops and some programs that can help you tap back into your inner creative self. So anyhow, thank you for the time today. I know you have choices when it comes to podcasts. I appreciate you being here on the Branding Laboratory. And if you have any questions or comments, please include them. Write us a review. If you have some guests that you would like to see on the show, please send them over to me as well. I'm Deevo, host of the Branding Laboratory, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Branding Laboratory. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Connect with us on social media for more branding tips and insights. And remember, your story matters. Until next time, keep building and sharing your unique brand story. I'll see you soon.